raid sirens across Tel Aviv began sounding within seconds of the first radar detections. Civil defense alerts spread across central Israel as missile trajectories appeared on tracking systems. Within minutes, one of the most densely populated urban regions in the Middle East was under active missile threat. Israeli authorities moved immediately to emergency posture. Civil defense networks instructed residents to enter protected shelters. Military command centers activated interception protocols. Airports reviewed emergency procedures. Hospitals began preparing for potential mass casualty intake. The incoming missiles were not a minor cross-border exchange or a limited rocket barrage from a nearby militant group. The trajectories indicated long-range launches consistent with Iranian missile capabilities. For Israeli defense planners, that distinction carries enormous weight. Israel has faced rocket attacks for decades from neighboring territories such as Gaza and southern Lebanon. Those attacks normally involve short-range projectiles, fired in large numbers. Israel's layered defense system is designed to intercept many of them before impact. Long-range ballistic missiles represent a different category of threat. These weapons travel hundreds or even thousands of kilometers. They rise high into the upper atmosphere before descending toward their targets at extreme speeds. Intercepting them requires entirely different defensive systems and a much smaller margin of error. Tel Aviv sits at the heart of Israel's economic and population center. The metropolitan region contains millions of residents, major financial institutions, technology companies, and key military infrastructure. A successful strike on this area would carry consequences far beyond physical damage. It would signal that Iran is prepared to cross a threshold that both sides have largely avoided for years: direct missile confrontation between the two states. The declaration of a nationwide emergency reflected that risk. Military analysts immediately focused on a central question: why would Iran launch missiles directly toward Israel's largest city? For decades, confrontation between the two powers has taken place through indirect channels: airstrikes in Syria, covert operations, proxy militias, cyber activity. Direct missile exchanges between Iran and Israel have remained rare. The strike on Tel Aviv suggested that this boundary may be shifting. And if that boundary moves, the strategic balance across the entire Middle East begins to change. Understanding why requires examining how the attack itself was executed and what systems made it possible. When radar systems detect a long-range missile launch, the timeline compresses quickly. From launch to impact, the entire sequence may last only minutes. That short window forces military decision-makers to rely on automated detection and interception systems. Iran's missile program has spent decades developing weapons capable of reaching targets across the Middle East. Several of these missiles fall into the category known as medium-range ballistic missiles. A ballistic missile follows a three-phase flight path. First comes the boost phase. Rocket engines ignite and push the missile upward at high speed. During this phase, the missile leaves the atmosphere and reaches the altitude required for long-distance travel. Second is the mid-course phase. The missile coasts through space along a calculated trajectory. At this point, it is essentially following a predictable path toward its target. Third comes the terminal phase. The warhead re-enters the atmosphere and begins descending rapidly toward the target area. During this final stage, the warhead can reach speeds exceeding several kilometers per second. For defenders, this stage presents the greatest challenge. Israel has spent years building a layered missile defense system designed to intercept threats at different ranges and altitudes. The most widely known system is Iron Dome, which is optimized to intercept short-range rockets and artillery projectiles. Longer-range threats are handled by different systems. David's Sling is designed to intercept medium-range missiles and cruise missiles. Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 are specialized systems intended to intercept ballistic missiles at high altitude, sometimes even outside the atmosphere. When early warning sensors detect a launch, tracking systems calculate the missile's trajectory. Computers determine whether the incoming weapon will land in a populated area or open ground. If the projected impact zone threatens a populated region, interceptor missiles are launched. Each interceptor attempts to collide with the incoming warhead at extremely high speed. The goal is not simply to damage the missile, but to destroy it completely before it reaches the ground. The strike toward Tel Aviv triggered precisely this type of layered defense response. Multiple systems were activated within seconds of detection. Missile defense operators had to determine the number of incoming projectiles, calculate their trajectories, and assign interception solutions almost immediately. This is the reality of modern missile warfare. Once a missile leaves the launch site, the defending country has very little time to react. The attack, therefore, reflects more than a single military action. It reflects the operational capabilities of the systems that launched the missiles and the defensive architecture designed to stop them. For many years, the confrontation between Iran and Israel followed an unwritten set of limits. Both states viewed each other as major strategic threats, yet direct military confrontation between them remained rare. Instead, conflict took place through indirect channels designed to reduce the risk of open war. Airstrikes, covert operations, and proxy forces became the main tools. Israel regularly conducted air operations against Iranian-linked infrastructure in Syria. These strikes targeted weapons shipments, missile storage facilities, and militia positions connected to Iran's regional network. Iran responded through methods that avoided direct attribution. Militia groups across the region carried out attacks on Israeli interests. Drone operations targeted infrastructure. Cyber activity increased. Maritime incidents occurred in the Red Sea and Persian Gulf. This pattern created a system known in military strategy as deterrence through controlled escalation. Both sides were willing to apply pressure. Both sides also tried to avoid crossing lines that would force the other into a large-scale military response. Direct missile strikes between Iran and Israel sat near the top of that escalation ladder. Launching ballistic missiles toward a major Israeli city risks triggering retaliation that could strike Iranian territory directly. That possibility has historically restrained both sides from moving into this stage of confrontation. The strike on Tel Aviv suggests that this restraint may be weakening. When deterrence functions properly, both sides believe that the cost of escalation outweighs the potential gain. Military planners call this a stable deterrence balance. Once one side decides the balance has shifted, behavior changes. There are several reasons this shift can occur. One possibility involves perceived military advantage. If one side believes its missile defenses, strike capabilities, or regional alliances provide stronger protection than before, it may accept higher levels of risk. Another factor is strategic signaling. A missile strike toward a high-profile city sends a message far beyond the battlefield. It demonstrates capability. It demonstrates willingness. It signals to adversaries that certain red lines may no longer apply. Such signals are rarely directed at a single audience. They are also observed by regional allies, rival powers, and military planners across the world. The Tel Aviv strike therefore carries significance beyond its immediate impact. It raises a broader strategic question. If deterrence between Iran and Israel is beginning to erode, the conflict could move from indirect confrontation toward direct military exchanges. And once that transition occurs, the dynamics of the entire region become far more unpredictable. The missile strike toward Tel Aviv cannot be understood by looking only at Iran's territory. The larger system behind this escalation stretches across several countries and multiple armed organizations. Over the past 2 decades, Iran has built a regional military network designed to extend its reach far beyond its borders. This network relies on allied armed groups, missile infrastructure, drone programs, and logistical supply routes that connect several conflict zones. The most powerful element of this network sits north of Israel. Hezbollah in Lebanon possesses one of the largest missile and rocket arsenals held by a non-state military force anywhere in the world. Estimates from defense analysts place the number of rockets and missiles in Hezbollah's stockpiles in the tens of thousands. Many of these weapons can reach deep into Israeli territory. Some systems are short-range rockets intended for saturation attacks. Others are longer-range missiles, capable of striking major cities and strategic facilities. Iran has played a central role in developing this capability. Weapons, technology, training, and logistical support have flowed through supply routes linking Iran to Syria and Lebanon. These routes move missile components, guidance systems, and drone technology into areas closer to Israel's borders. Syria forms another key part of this network. Iranian military advisors and allied militia units have operated inside Syria for years. These forces helped support the Syrian government during the country's civil war. At the same time, they established logistical hubs and storage facilities that support Iran's regional operations. Israeli air operations inside Syria have often targeted these locations. Military planners view them as staging areas for missile transfers and drone launches. Iraq also plays a role within this regional system. Several militia groups aligned with Iran operate across Iraqi territory. These organizations possess drone capabilities and shorter-range missile systems. Their presence expands the geographic reach of Iran's network. When viewed together, these locations form a distributed military structure. Missile launch sites, drone bases, and logistical corridors stretch from Iran through Iraq and Syria to Lebanon. This structure allows Iranian-backed forces to threaten Israeli territory from multiple directions. Such a system complicates defense planning. Israel must monitor several borders simultaneously while tracking potential launch locations across a wide geographic area. The strike toward Tel Aviv highlights how this network can translate strategic influence into direct military pressure. What appears as a single missile launch may in fact reflect years of infrastructure development across an entire region. And when that infrastructure becomes active, escalation can spread quickly across multiple fronts. A missile strike toward Tel Aviv does not exist in isolation. It sits inside a wider military environment where several fronts could activate at the same time. This possibility represents one of the central concerns for Israeli defense planners. Israel's military doctrine assumes that any major conflict in the region may involve multiple directions of attack simultaneously. The country's geography is narrow. Its population centers are concentrated along the Mediterranean coast. This means that several hostile fronts can threaten the same urban areas. The most dangerous scenario involves Israel's northern border. Hezbollah's missile arsenal in Lebanon represents the largest immediate threat. Many of these rockets are capable of reaching deep into Israel's population centers. Some carry guidance systems that improve targeting accuracy. A large-scale missile exchange with Hezbollah would involve far greater numbers of projectiles than the occasional cross-border rocket incidents seen in previous years. Military analysts describe this type of strategy as missile saturation. Instead of launching a small number of missiles, an attacking force fires large waves in a short period of time. The goal is to overwhelm defensive systems by forcing them to intercept many targets simultaneously. Even highly advanced missile defense systems have limits. Each interceptor missile is expensive and must be launched individually. Defensive batteries can track multiple threats, but sustained waves of incoming projectiles create increasing pressure on the system. If Hezbollah were to join a broader escalation, Israeli air defense networks would need to divide attention between different directions of attack. At the same time, Israel could face threats from other areas of the region. Drone systems launched from Syria or Iraq can travel long distances while flying at lower altitudes. These drones are smaller than ballistic missiles and can approach targets from unexpected directions. Such weapons are often used alongside missile attacks to complicate defensive planning. Another factor in this system is the presence of United States forces in the region. American naval vessels, air bases, and missile defense systems operate across several Middle Eastern locations. In a wider regional conflict, these assets could become involved in missile interception or defensive support operations. This creates a broader military framework where escalation between two countries could quickly involve additional actors. Once several fronts activate simultaneously, controlling the pace of conflict becomes far more difficult, and the risk of regional war increases sharply. A missile strike toward Tel Aviv carries implications that reach beyond the immediate confrontation between Iran and Israel. Events like this are observed closely by governments, military planners, and energy markets around the world. The reason is simple. Missile warfare has become one of the defining military technologies of the current era. Over the past 30 years, many countries have invested heavily in missile programs. Compared with large air forces or naval fleets, Missiles offer a relatively accessible way to project power across long distances. They require fewer pilots, fewer large bases, and smaller operational footprints. A missile can travel hundreds or even thousands of kilometers and reach strategic targets within minutes. This capability changes how deterrence works between states. Countries that possess long-range missiles gain the ability to threaten infrastructure, cities, and military installations far beyond their borders. Even a limited number of such weapons can influence strategic calculations. The Middle East has become one of the most concentrated missile environments in the world. Several countries possess ballistic missile programs. Many armed groups now operate drone and missile systems as well. This creates a dense network of potential launch sites across the region. Each of these systems adds complexity to regional security. Events like the strike toward Tel Aviv also influence global energy systems. The Middle East remains a central hub for oil production and maritime energy transport. Large volumes of global energy supplies move through nearby shipping routes, such as the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea corridors. Escalation between regional powers raises concerns about disruption to these routes. Even limited conflict can affect shipping insurance, tanker traffic, and global oil pricing. Energy markets respond quickly to signs that military confrontation could threaten supply flows. Major global powers monitor these developments closely. The United States maintains significant military forces in the region, partly to protect strategic infrastructure and shipping lanes. Russia and China observe the situation from a different perspective, studying how missile warfare and air defense systems perform in real conflict conditions. Each new confrontation provides data. Military planners analyze interception rates, missile trajectories, and defensive responses. These observations influence future weapons development and strategic planning. The strike toward Tel Aviv therefore represents more than a regional event. It illustrates how missile technology, regional alliances, and global economic systems intersect in modern conflict. When these systems interact, a single military action can carry consequences far beyond the location where the missiles were launched.